A large part of academic writing is learning how to effectively integrate sources. Sometimes you're going to be integrating primary sources, such as a short story or a poem or something like that, or you're going to be integrating research that you have done to help develop an argument that you're trying to make. So no matter the reason that you're integrating source, you have to do so effectively, or it's going to negatively affect your credibility and it's going to hurt your reader's engagement with what you're trying to say. So what is the point? Why do we integrate sources? First, you need to establish your credibility, knowledge, and skill, because integrating sources into your own writing really does take a bit of skill. It also shows that you know how to research well. It shows that you know how to integrate somebody else's ideas into your own, which is called synthesis. And it shows that you are a knowledgeable writer who knows how to integrate effectively. So really, it's a huge impact on your writing and how your reader perceives you. It also supports and develops your main ideas. So any sources that you integrate are directly related to the ideas that you're trying to present and tell your reader. So you want to make sure that anytime you use a quote, paraphrase, or summary, that it's adequately developing and supporting what you are already saying. You also have to make sure you do a good job in explaining what your reader needs to know about that quote, paraphrase, or summary. It also places your writing within a conversation surrounding a topic. So any given topic is going to have a professional conversation surrounding it. And that is people who publish blogs or articles or newspaper posts, whatever, about a given topic. And then when you use that information in your own essay, you are putting your own voice into that conversation. So you need to find articles that are well informed, that are well received, unbiased, things like that, because that, again, is a direct correlation to your own writing, and you want to show that, hey, I've got something to say about this topic too. And so again, you enter that conversation, just, obviously in a different way as a student as opposed to a professional or a published writer. But if you imagine it in that way and say, well, this is what everybody else has said, this is what I have to say, I'm going to join their conversation. So what do you include when you integrate sources? You can choose to include direct quotes, which is when you take a sentence or several, word for word, you use quotation marks, things like that. You want to use them sparingly, and you want to use them with purpose. So you want to use quotes when you cannot reword the information in your own words, such as a paraphrase or a summary. So the information that you include in a direct quote needs to be really good, really important, and it really needs to emphasize what you're trying to say. Also, you don't want to use quotes for just a really short passage. A rule that I learned long ago that may not even be valid anymore, but still works for me, is the 4-word rule. If a passage that you're trying to use as a direct quote is 4 words or less, you don't need to quote it. You can rephrase that. You can reword that so that it doesn't need to be a direct quote. If you're going to use a direct quote, it needs to be at least 1 or 2 lines in your paper. You don't want your quotes to go over 4 lines. Then they get too long, then you have to format them as a block quote, and I don't like block quotes in most of my students' essays because those essays are too short. If you're writing, say, a 10-page research paper, then a block quote might be applicable and useful. But we've already talked about how to engage your reader, and for me, block quotes are very disengaging. I won't even read them. I will check to make sure that you are formatting them properly, but I don't want to read that much. I want to read what you have to say, not what Bob has to say. No matter how credible they might be, I do not read block quotes. So keep your reader engaged, use short, direct quotes, but make sure that they are used sparingly and make sure they have purpose and they are done properly. Do not quote random words. When it comes to paraphrases are when you do almost a word-to-word correlation. So perhaps you want to paraphrase a sentence or a phrase. Say you have a short phrase that you don't want to quote directly, then you would paraphrase it, and then you just kind of reword it in your own words and it's quite similar in length. So if you're quoting or if you're paraphrasing a sentence from a source, you're going to have a sentence as a paraphrase. So they're going to be pretty similar in length. Summaries, on the other hand, are a more general summation of what your source is saying. And you're summarizing a longer work into a sentence or two. So, for example, your source might have a good paragraph, chapter, or you might even summarize the entire book, and you can do that in several sentences. So again, you use your quote sparingly, with power and with purpose. When you have a short passage, you can paraphrase it, and it's going to be about the same length as it is in the source. And then with a summary, you can summarize longer pieces of information in a line or two in your paper. So these are 3 different ways that you can integrate sources, and you have to be aware of what your purpose is, what your reader wants from you, and even the topic that you're discussing. You have to think about all of these things and then decide, I want to give this information. Do I quote it? Do I paraphrase it? Or do I summarize it? You've got to think about things like that. So moving on, how do you integrate effectively? Here's some rules on what to do and what not to do. You have to make sure that you introduce every single author and source the first time you use it. This shows your reader why they can trust your sources. You've got to give a name, and you've got to give a title. And then focus on the author once you introduce them. Don't say that the article states, because an article doesn't state anything. It's an inanimate object, but the author does. It's the author's work, so focus on the author. So you need to introduce every author and every source for the first time, just the first time. After you introduce an author, you simply refer to them by their last name. So let's look here. This is all made up, so don't think that this is real. Maggie Smith, author of How to Integrate Quotes Like a Pro, states, and then go on with your quote. Here I've got the full name. I've got why she's a credible person and why I'm quoting her. If she's an author of a book, that's got to be something. And then the information. You can also, instead of focusing on what they're an author of, you can look at their credibility in terms of their profession. So, New York Times editor Bob Biggins disagrees. And then he, or you could just say Biggins claims, something like that. So there are multiple ways to introduce your sources and your authors, but the first time you use every single one, you have to introduce them at length. So give a title, give their full name, give some credibility and some reason why your reader needs to trust them. After you've done this, after you've introduced each author and their source, use attribution tags to demonstrate what info is from that author. So this is when you start synthesizing multiple authors and multiple works within one of your body paragraphs. So let's start back up here. Maggie Smith, author of How to Integrate Quotes Like a Pro, states something. Smith continues. She further states that. Then you move to the next author. On the other hand, New York Times editor Bob Biggins disagrees. He claims that. He also states, and so on. So you need to show your reader what information is coming from which author. That is why you introduce them at length the first time and then refer to them by their last name or by the appropriate pronoun afterwards. Okay, we're going to take this even further. You use in-text citations every time you quote, paraphrase, or summarize information from a source. An in-text citation means that it is a citation within the text of your paper. So hopefully that name is not confusing. Another way to call this type of citation is parenthetical documentation or parenthetical citation because it's in parentheses. So here's what you do for in-text citations. The purpose of the in-text citation is to show what source some information is coming from and what page number specifically it's coming from. So if you have a sentence with information from a source and there is no last name within that sentence, you use the author's last name and the page number. In some cases, you may not have an author's last name, then you would use a condensed version of a title. In the sentence, if you do have the last name in the sentence, you don't need it in the citation, so you just use the page number. So going back up here, In the sentence that begins, Maggie Smith, author of How to Integrate Quotes Like a Pro, states, because her last name is in the sentence, you would do a parentheses and the page number. Let's see here. When you come down here, Smith continues. Again, page number. She further states that in this sentence, you would need Smith and the page number because the last name is not mentioned previously. Okay, so hopefully this is all, I mean, I know this is a total crash course. This is something we're going to work on all term. So this is just a good, starting point for what you need to include every time you try to integrate a source. You always need to introduce each author and source. Then you need to use continual attribution tags. Then you need to use citations. You need those 3 elements for every single source that you use in your paper, and you need to do it throughout your paper. So citations are not a one-time thing. It's every time you use a quote, a summary, or a paraphrase. So even if you're like, oh, well, I'm summarizing this entire book. Okay, then you obviously wouldn't need a page number. But if you don't mention the last name of the author in a sentence, you need to show where it's coming from. All right, so here's some major no-nos about integrating sources. These things, items 1 through 3, are going to help build your credibility as an author. It's going to help keep your writer engaged. It's going to help keep all of your information straight, and it's going to help further your argument or whatever type of writing you're doing. These no-nos are things that are going to hurt your credibility and things that are going to make you look like an unknowledgeable writer. Number 1 rule, do not have a quote stand alone as a sentence. You have to introduce every single quote you use. So if you just have a quote like this, standing alone as a sentence, your reader's going to go, what, are you too lazy? Can you not introduce this quote? Why is this standing alone as a quote? What am I supposed to take from it? And really, I should add a note up here. After every quote, summary, paraphrase that you use, you need to have an explanation after it. Do not leave your reader guessing what they're supposed to take from that source reference. Okay, so introduce it, cite it, attribute it appropriately, and then explain it. That's really, really important. So when you leave a sentence, a quote standing alone as a sentence, that's what you're not doing. You're not explaining what they're supposed to be taking from it. You're also not giving proper context beforehand. So here's what not to do. Here's a good example of what to do. Instead, Smith suggests that writers need to effectively introduce every direct quote that is used to establish strong credibility and add power to their writing. So this is a properly introduced and cited quote. Again, last name is in the sentence, so it's not needed in the citation. Also, make sure you don't just use one citation at the end of a paragraph to cover all of the source information within that paragraph. That's lazy and it's incorrect and it gets borderline with plagiarism. And that's what I'm trying to protect you from here. So say you have one long paragraph that is all focused on Maggie Smith's ideas. You need to have more than just her last name in parentheses at the end. Every time you change page, you need to indicate that with your citations. Every time you're taking a direct quote, you need a citation. Anytime you're paraphrasing, summarizing, you need a citation. So you need citations throughout your paragraphs for each sentence or piece of information, not sentence, but each page that you're working with. You don't want to just have a catch-all at the end of the paragraph. That is not correct, and it could get you into trouble with plagiarism. Lastly, I've already mentioned this before, but it's extremely important. Do not quote random words or super short phrases. This goes back to the 4-word rule I listed up here. You need, anytime you quote something, it's got to be for a reason. So, say this is in your paper. Smith states that random words don't need to be quoted because it hurts a writer's credibility. So, don't do short little quotes like this. It hurts, again, your credibility. So you want to make sure that anytime you use a quote, it's long, it's important, it has power, and it has proper emphasis for what you're trying to say. And I love this picture. It's hilarious. If you don't get it, it's Oprah. If you've ever watched Oprah, I don't know. This is, yeah. You know, she gets excited, or at least she used to. So everybody gets a citation. That's exciting, right? Sightings exciting. I'll say that a couple times. Anyway, I hope this helps you get started with integrating sources into your writing. This really goes for any course, any type of paper, whether it's fiction or nonfiction that you're integrating, it does not matter. Any level of writing needs to use sources in one way or another. So all of this information is quite broad and general for any kind of writing that you do. So I hope it's helpful. If you have any questions, let me know.